So this isn't a tutorial, it's more of a learn with me sort of thing, because it's something that I'm in the process of getting to grips with. It's a project that started quite a while ago, and then it's just developed, and I thought now's probably a really good time to put it together. So I've been experimenting for a little while with salts analysis, and I've been fine-tuning where I think its most useful application is for us. And I've come to the conclusion that it's most useful for ruling out what the cause isn't, so ruling out major external issues. And then the secondary application really is then identifying where there's potential groundwater. There's a few useful other things that we found and I'll go into, but essentially that's what it was for. We generally work with a staged remedial process for damp and mould issues, and that involves finding and clearly identifying the most significant and most likely cause, resolving that, and then reviewing. By following that approach, it means that we're not wasting our time or tenants' time on remedial works that aren't actually going to solve the problem, and it, as a byproduct, then saves money for the rent account. So the start of the project was relating to trying to put some information together from everything I'd learned so far into a couple of really handy guides, looking at things like moisture profiling, what you can interpret based on that, what the most likely causes are, and then what's the most effective solutions to each of those problems. And then that led on quite nicely to salts testing. And what I'd found is that although it's really useful using the protimeter salts analysis kit, what I was finding was that until you'd done it quite a few times, it was actually really difficult to gauge all of the different shades, because it was fairly basic that it would say it's this shade of red or this shade of, it's either red or it's yellow or it's brown, but there's so many shades in between that actually do mean a lot and make a difference to what your interpretation is going to be. So I started doing some testing with aquarium testing strips, and then in the meantime I was waiting for a new delivery of the protimeter kit. There was a delay, and I realise now it's because they've been developing it and they've actually made some really good improvements. What I had while I was waiting for that is I had a couple of properties, one that I look at every single day, and I already know that the main source of that moisture is from the ground. And then there was one that I went to last month, and it was a really similar sort of presentation. You can see that's the one on the right hand side, that it's risen from near the ground, and then it's got this salt band. But it's not from groundwater salts, and I know that. I know that the source isn't groundwater, but I only know that because the course was really obvious, and I wondered then, is there a way to take the information from what we do know, because it's very rare that we know everything right at the beginning, and then work back from that to then find a solution to some of those issues where we don't know what the cause is, by just tracking it. And I've asked some of my colleagues, some of my peers for their advice, some of the most experienced surveyors that I know, and they've got some really useful kind of tips. So a lot of them had said it just doesn't look like the kind of salts you'd see with groundwater salts, and you've got this kind of streaking of free moisture which you generally wouldn't get, and the presence of mould. So those things were really useful, but for the majority of them, they just know, and I think it's just something you develop over time. We don't all have that luxury, so just try and put something together. So I started this testing. I had the new salts kit arrive, and then the first one that I was looking at was this property that I already know does have an issue, and this is just a quick run through the testing process. So this is getting that moisture profile, and you can see that the skirting is showing us potentially damp, and then all the way up fairly high readings, and then there's a few where it will go up to 100, which is likely where there's a salt band or bands where there's been different levels of that rising. It then stops and gets to its highest at around 1300 mil, and then it's a sudden cut off, and it kind of goes up and down there. And these are relative readings really, so we don't have to worry too much about it, but it does tell us a little bit. Looking outside the building, we can see that it's a solid wall. There are a few issues that might be contributing, so the ceiling around the door isn't in great condition, but also we can see that there's no real indication of any gutter leaks. There's no indication of dampness on the outside of the wall. Specifically, the render's in good condition, the paint's in good condition. So what I've done is taken a sample around 5 centimetres square and then bagged that up ready for testing. Going back to that initial guide that I mentioned that I've kind of been putting together and then put on the back burner, what I've done is just circled what I think looks looks like the most likely profile, the profile that matches the most, and that's one that is more typical of rise and dampness, where the source is the groundwater. So what I then wanted to do was then show what does that look like when we test it through this salt analysis process. So this is back at the office. We've taken that material and then we're just going through this process. So the first one that we're testing for is the chlorides. Once we put the tablets in, I'm expecting it to go yellow, which would indicate that there is a strong presence of chlorides. And there it is. So we've got the positive indication there. The next one is the nitrates, and this is with the new strip rather than the tablets, which is loads easier, and I find it a lot easier to gauge against the colour because it's really simple, it's really easy, it's just on the side there. So credit to Protimeter for improving it. I think it will make a massive difference. The next thing I did was then tested it, compared it with aquarium testing strips. And I've had really good success with this in the past. On this particular one, we're looking at the 5th from the top. There's 2 nitrates it's looking for. I think, if I remember correctly, we're looking at the NO3. So that's also showing a positive indication. So for this particular one, positive nitrates, positive chlorides, and that's a really good indication that the source of that moisture is from the ground. Then going on to the next sample, which was from this property, which had quite a severe plumbing leak. So this had then led to moisture being trapped between vinyl floor tiles and the carpet, and then it just found its way to this internal wall, then rose up the wall by similar levels, so less than 1500 mil, but more than 1200. So testing this then, I knew what I was expecting, but it was really useful just to demonstrate it and prove it to myself. This is what it looks like. So if there's no contact with any groundwater, I'd expect it to be negative for both, but there are sometimes slight anomalies. And this is where the sample here, it should be brown for negative. If you haven't done this before, it's really difficult to know, well, that wasn't as yellow as the other sample. The nitrates are also showing as negative here, but in my view, based on my experience, what I'm seeing here is actually a trace of chlorides. And then it's useful to then have a think, why is that? Where would that come from? And I'm no scientist, but I've only seen this particular combination together when there's been quite an extreme plumbing leak. So it's useful to know that an interpretation could be, if you've got chlorides and no nitrates, that you should be looking for a plumbing leak, or at least try and rule that out. Again, the aquarium testing strips have shown the same, absolutely no indication of any nitrates. So that's exactly what we're expecting. The next thing that I did, just to demonstrate to you the possible applications of aquarium testing strips, is on the basis that they're not going to fix every issue for you. They're not going to find every issue, but they can be really useful early indicator. This is just an example of how you can use them, again, with deionized water in a home for really, really simple to test. And in this case, this test will demonstrate, because it's the same as the first home, it will demonstrate that there's a presence of nitrates in that wall sample. But equally, if you used it the same in a home that you don't think has had contact with groundwater, or you're not sure, just a really, really quick, simple and easy method of being able to demonstrate that. So my general view on this is that I really do think that aquarium testing strips have a place. They're £8 for about 100, and they can be a really good early indicator. But I do also think that the actual official salt analysis, any brand that's better calibrated, if that's the right word, would probably be more appropriate for a proper investigation. And the combination of the nitrates and the chlorides, I think, is also really, really useful. So I think I'll probably continue working with them alongside each other, and it will just depend on where I am and what I'm doing.